It was from these isolated farmhouses, situated among sandy reaches where such old magical names lingered intact, that the first rumors began to spread of a serious sea invasion. These rumors, once started among these outposts of human habitation, excited anxious alarm. And well, they might, for that whole district is a very peculiar one. On one side of it lies the great western channel of those moon-drawn tides, and the other so many brackish ditches and inland meres, that the dams and dikes, if they once yield to the mounting up of the waters, are liable to give way in vast numbers. In the memory of the older dwellers in these regions, a queer amphibious race descended from Norse invaders and from Celticized aboriginals, was a vivid image of these last time the sea banks had broken and the land had been flooded, an image of drowned cattle and ruined pastures and hurried and tumultuous human fights and escapes. On that occasion the waters of the sea had swept so far inland, mingling with the waters of the land, that the configuration of the country had completely changed. Overtopping the banks, breaking the sluices, turning rivers into huge floods and tiny streams into rushing rivers, the sea had come so far that the land, in many cases always lower than sea level, had reverted to the sea and become part of the sea. With the waning of the moon, on that occasion, the waters retreated, but not before they had left their tribute. Many infinitesimal sea creatures, tiny sea, animalcule, and microscopic saltwater beings, must have been carried over the land where these unnatural tides pushed their way, and it is likely enough that many of these marine invaders, when the water receded, were deposited in the rich loam of the Isle of Glastonbury. An island indeed did Glastonbury become in those strange days. Mr. Shepherd, the Glastonbury policeman, and Mr. Merry, the Glastonbury curator, would frequently speak of that epoch with bated breath. Well, some of the rumors that ran along those sandy flats and leapt like living messengers of disaster from bog tussock to bog tussock were not without cause. There was likely to do this year, ere March ended, an inundation even more serious than that land had known since very ancient days. For these dark green waves, smooth and slippery, without spray, without spindrift, and smelling so strangely of the mid-Atlantic, brought memories of far-off mysterious disasters. Intimidations they brought of lost islands and submerged sea reefs where, if Plutarch is to be trusted, Demetrius the traveler, 100 years before Christ, heard tales of superhuman personalities living remote and sea-encircled. I think I put the innotation on the wrong syllable there, but you get the idea. Yes, even before the 15th of March, these terrific ocean waves had disturbed the cormorants of St. Audie's Bay and scattered the gulls at Black Rock, at Blue Bend, and at Quacktock's Head. The dwellers at Kilchantay had grown uneasy, and from Ben Hole to Wickmore, and from Stern Flats to the mouth of the River Parrot, and over Bridgewater Bar to Gore Sand, there were wild gusts of ragged wings and shrieking sea cries, and vague sobbings and lappings and murmurs in the night. And all this under a moon that continued growing larger and larger, until it reached a size that seemed pregnant with terrifying events. The mouths of the Parrot and the Brew are not far from each other, opposite Sturt Island, and the whole 7 miles from Otterhampton to Mark Causeway, across Pollet Level and Huntsmill Level, inland from Highbridge and Burnham, are intersected with dams and sluices and weirs, holding back the sea floods. From Huntsville level to Glastonbury cannot be much more than 8 miles distance as the crow flies, and it is across these 8 miles that the waters of the channel would flow, for it is all beneath sea level. If those dikes, as they had done at least once in the memory of living men, should yield to the rising of the tides. Of all the mortal senses, that sense of smell carries the human soul back the farthest in its long psychic pilgrimage. And by these far-drawn channel airs and remote sea odors, the inmost souls of many dwellers in northwest Somerset must have been roused during those weeks in March. It is the old recurrent struggle with the elements, as the sense of these things reach the spirit of the sharp-set poignance of smell, that brings one age of human life into contact with another. There is a comfort in these communities, in these continuities, in a feeling of mysterious elation, but strange forebodings, too, and uneasy warnings. That hidden wanderer, incarcerated in our temporary flesh and blood, incarnated in our temporary flesh and blood, and so many times before, centuries and aeons before, had smelled deep-sea seaweed and sun-bleached driftwood and the ice-cold chills of Arctic seas, sinks down upon such far-off memories as upon the stern of a voyaging ship, and sees, as if in a dream, the harbors and the islands of its old experience. Thus, as these unnatural tides under this unusual moon gathered and rose out of the western channel, feelings that had not come to the population of those places for many a long year caught them unawares as they went to and fro about their business, and disturbed them with thoughts beyond the reaches of their souls. End quotes. But the people of Glastonbury that year, especially the ones with whom the reader has most to do in this present narration, were so preoccupied with the exciting public events of that epoch that they gave little heed into these airy syllables. The humbler people especially continued to buy and sell, as the new fashion dictated, much as their fathers had done before in their fashion, without paying any attention to these fleeting intimidations drawn forth from the recess of these beings by this ocean smells. Smells so soul-piercing and so mysterious, following the waxing of this pretentious moon. Meanwhile, the strangely constituted Glastonbury commune, a little microcosmic state within the historic kingdom of England, continued to function in its own queer, unprecedented manner. The London newspapers had grown recently a little weary of this 9 days' wonder, and the various protracted lawsuits evoked by the small commune's interferences with private property excited much less attention than they had done a couple of months before, when the thing began. Philip Crowe no longer required the protection of the Taunton police for his non-union labors, brought into Wookie from Bristol and Birmingham. In all the various legal actions that he had initiated against this new tiny state, this microscopic imperium in imperio, were dragging on in the London courts without doing anything to change the curious status quo at Glastonbury. Both his new road, however, proudly skirting Mr. Twiggs' fields, and his great new bridge, proudly disregarding the ancient bridge perilous, were growing towards completion. Of solid cement, the new road was, and the new bridge was of solid steel, and the cheap troubles that still spasmodically arose were wordy battles, mounting sometimes to fisticuffs and the throwing of stones, between the Glastonbury mob and the men hired by Philip's Taunton contractor. The surveyor from Shepton Mallet, whose father-in-law, with demonic longevity, still continued to milk his Jersey cattle, appeared and disappeared at intervals in the backbaitable ground, replacing his stakes and strings along the edge of the lake village mounds, tokens of private possession which, although watched imperturbably by number one's inquisitive Betsy, were always being carried off by invaders from Bovetown and Paradise, invaders not alienated, you may be sure, by a familiar robber band. It was surprising how this new cooperative of collective system of retail trade, introduced among the various shops that had been included in the new lease from the lord of the manor, proceeded, running much more smoothly than anyone would have supposed possible. This, however, was largely due to a somewhat extraneous cause, namely the overwhelming influx of religious pilgrims into the little commune from every portion of the inhabited globe. Not quite 3 months had passed since the mayor's notorious opening of the Saxon Arch, and doubtless there were places in Africa, India, and China where pilgrims were only then just settling out for Glastonbury. But the world was so unsettled, and there was such a spirit of restlessness abroad, that this new outburst of magic and miracle in a spot so easy of access had been responded to in a wave of excitement from every country upon the earth. And as all these pilgrims had to be fed, and as all these visitors wanted souvenirs to carry back to their homes, the town began to grow rich. Thus, when the Glastonbury councilmen, now promoted to be bureaucrats in an independent community, came to divide, as they did on the first day of each week, the profits of the new commune, these profits were found to be so considerable and so far beyond anything that the worldly tradesmen had ever earned for themselves under normal conditions, that their tendency was to make hay while the sun shone, and allow the methods and sources of this new increment to pass unquestioned. I'm going to stop now. A little out of it tonight. Well, this edition of Glastonbury is brought to you by ServPro. There for your, mitigation needs.